Wow. Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Absolutely. 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 Good. Good. Let's remember Brother Joe's friend, Ricky Hewitt. He has had a brain aneurysm. He was or is still in intensive care. Okay, and he will be there for a week. So he means a lot to Brother Joe. He's more than just a friend, he said, a practical brother. So let's lift him up in prayer. Again, his name is Ricky Hewitt. Do we have any other requests? Yes, ma'am. Okay, absolutely. Yes, ma'am. Let's continue to lift up Brother Chappelle in prayer and remember their children, their three children, their two sons, Lonnie and Donnie, and their daughter Sheila, that God would save their soul and deliver them. Do we have any other requests this morning for prayer? Yes, ma'am. Okay. All right, let's remember Sister Geraldine's niece. She said that they don't know what's going on with her, but she is in a lot of pain. So, what is her name, Sister? I'm sorry. Evelyn. Okay, let's remember Evelyn Bradley this morning in prayer. Do we have any other requests this morning? Oh, yes. Amen. Let's lift up our dear sister Annie in prayer this morning as well. Any others? Okay. I have a request for my daughter. Um, my daughter has three dogs, and these dogs are like her children. Destiny has not been able to have children, and these dogs have taken that place, that void in her life. And so, one of the bigger dogs attacked her much smaller dog, and so they had to remove one of the dog's eyes, and the other eye is pretty damaged, and they don't know if the dog is just going to be completely blind. But Destiny's had this dog for about 9 years or better. And, any of you that have pets, you know how much you love your pets and how much they mean to you. And so, just really, I pray that this dog will not be completely blind and that God would intercede. The dog's name is Lily. So, if y'all don't mind just lifting that up in prayer, God, it all matters. Do we have any other request? Okay. If not, Brother Joe, will you take us to the good Lord in prayer, please? Amen. Now, the title of our Sunday school lesson this morning is Hannah, Devoted to God. And then our central truth says, God hears and answers the earnest prayers of his people. And that is the truth. In fact, you could take that word earnest out and just put God hears and answers the prayers of his people. Because even if it's earnest or passive, God hears and answers the prayers of his people. We must believe that he truly hears and truly does answer our prayers. So, Brother Chappelle, if you don't mind, if you could get us started this morning by reading 1 Samuel chapter 1, verse 5 to let's do to verse 11. And then, Sister Chappelle, if you would read verses 12 to verse 15. Brother Joe, if you would read verses 16 to verse 20. Sister Rudell, if you would read verses 27, 28, and then 1 Samuel chapter 2, verse 1. And Sister Annie, if you would read our golden text, please. Amen. Now, in today's lesson, the woman we will study on is Hannah. Hannah was a sincere and faithful woman of the Lord. She was committed, she was driven, and she was earnest. She knew what her heart desired, and she was determined to seek the Lord for it until she had it. And so the Lord rewarded Hannah by granting her petition, and in return, Hannah kept her vow, but she not only kept it, but she kept her vow with gladness. It was a hard vow to keep, but she kept it, and she kept it with honor, and she kept it with gladness. And so before we go any further with what I'm explaining, we'll go ahead and start our lesson in 1 Samuel chapter 1, verses 5 through 28. And this is where Hannah's story begins. Now, Hannah, she was used of the Lord to give birth to a son named Samuel, who became a prophet of the Lord that would later be used of God to anoint Israel's first king. So Hannah's story, it was really the starting point of a pivotal change in Israel's history. They went from being a people that were led by spiritual leaders like Moses and Joshua, and then to certain judges like Deborah, Gideon, and Samuel, just to name a few, and then to a variety of kings. And so the Lord used Hannah's desperation for a child as a method to bring change and answers and his plan to fruition for Israel. You see, it was time for things in Israel to change. It was time for things in Israel to stop going the way they were going. And it was time for them to stop doing what was right in their own eyes and become a people that could submit to leadership once again. Now, let's understand, it is never good for a church or even a business to function or to continue or to go on without a qualified leader. When a church or a business goes on without a leader, then that church or that business, it is destined for failure, because people in groups within the church or business, what will they do? They will rise up and attempt to lead as they see fit. They'll do so without any calling or training for the position. And if it continues too long and a leader is sent, the unmanned church or business will most likely mutiny against the leader. And so it was needful for Israel to have a leader, and God used Hannah's heart's desire to do his bidding. I have seen that myself within a church where there went on a period of time within the church where there was no leadership, and then certain people within the church rose up and declared themselves as leaders. And then when a leader was appointed and put into position, it was very challenging and very difficult for that leader to gain control over the church. I've seen that in businesses where the person that's supposed to lead doesn't lead. And what happens? The people in the business, they all of a sudden declare themselves as leaders, and they try to rise up and lead the business. And then next thing you know, nobody knows, there's too many chiefs and not enough Indians. And nobody knows who is doing what anymore and how it's going to get done. It's the same thing in the classroom. If that teacher does not lead that classroom, and it doesn't matter what age they are, from pre-K to adults in high school to 12th grade, if there is no leader in that classroom, even if they're 4 years old, 5 years old, or whatever, if there's no leadership, if there's no teacher, no leader in that classroom, those children will join together, they will mutiny together, and they will I have literally seen them take down teachers. I have literally seen, in the 20 years that I have been there, I have seen teachers get stressed out, maxed out, and say, I quit, I'm done, this is not my calling, and they hit the road running, and they have retired from that. They feel defeated. They need, I'm serious, they need psychiatric counseling and all these things because a group of 5-year-olds took over when they should have came in, had their stuff together, and be ready to take the lead. Even when I go into a classroom that I'm not specifically in charge of. It's not my classroom. Sometimes I'm pulled to have to cover a class, and I'll go into that classroom, and the first thing I say is, I am not your teacher. I am not Miss So-and-so. I am going to do things different. It's going to be okay. My job today is to get you home safely, and we're just going to rock and roll and do it like I want you to do it, okay? Everybody good? Good. All right, so let's go. So I just go right in. You know, you have to do that. You have to go in as the leader and lead and be the example and lead by that example. And so, but for Israel, it was time for them to have a change in the way that things were going. And so God, he used Hannah's heart's desire to do his bidding. You think about that. You have an unfulfilled heart's desire. Maybe God wants to use whatever that is that's unfulfilled at this point in time and use it somehow, some way for his bidding. You see, God always has a reason for a delay. When he might say, no, not now. He has a reason for delaying his answer. There's something else that he's working behind the scenes. There's something else that he's doing that you're not fully aware of yet, that's not come to the surface yet. And sometimes God delays for a reason. You see? And so this is what he was doing in Hannah's life. She had got to a point of desperation. And so her answer at that point in time was no. Now in verse 6, we read how Hannah's adversary provoked her to make her fret and worry when she saw Hannah was not able to conceive children. You see, Hannah's adversary knew Hannah's weakness. She knew her sore spot. She knew what button to push that would provoke Hannah, that would cause Hannah to fret, that would cause her to worry, that would cause her to suffer and experience anguish, that would cause her to be in sorrow and in grief. You see, that adversary knew Hannah's weakness, and she couldn't wait to push those buttons because her adversary was jealous of her. Hannah had something that her adversary wanted. And so her adversary said, well, you have what I want, so I'm going to make you miserable. You see, misery loves company, does it not? And when somebody else is miserable and they see you experiencing the joy of the Lord, the goodness of God, and all of his benefits, the enemy has a way of saying, well, let me push your sore spot to make you worry because you have something that I don't have. You have something I'm never going to have. You have something that I'm never going to experience. The enemy is never going to know what it's like to have peace. He's never going to know what it's like to have the joy of the Lord. He's never going to know what it's like to be redeemed. But you do. You know what it's like to be redeemed. You know what it's like to have the joy of the Lord. You know what it's like to be forgiven. You know what it's like to be called a child of God. You know what it's like to have your name written down in heaven. But your enemy does not. And so he wants to come and he wants to provoke and he wants to make you feel his misery. You see, he just wants to bring you down to his level. But God, he has a way of just coming by and lifting you up. He has a way of putting people in your life that come by and take you by the arm and say, let's just keep on marching, child of God. Let's just keep on marching, brother. Let's just keep on marching, sister. Let's just keep on, pressing on. Now, that provoking of Hannah's adversary, that provoking caused Hannah to become stronger. It caused her to become more determined and fierce about her heart's desire. You see, that enemy came in and was trying to make her suffer and make her fret and make her worry and make her feel less than what she really was. Loved above all others. That's who she was. She was favored and she was loved above all others. And that enemy, that adversary tried to come in and tear her down and make her feel like she was less than what she actually was. But Hannah rose above that. She said, I'm not going to let you tear me down. Instead, I'm going to let this make me stronger. It made her stronger, it made her more determined, and it made her more fierce about her heart's desire. It really helped her to get her focus. It really helped her. You see, I know, Brother Joe, sometimes when you go hunting and you look through that scope that's on the gun, if that scope is off just a little bit, you can't see very clearly. When I take pictures, and if that picture is off just a little bit, and that lens is off just a tad, I know how to take that lens and twist it a little bit this way and a little bit that way, and next thing you know, that picture gets clearer and clearer and clearer, and I've got the full beauty of the picture that I'm trying to capture in that moment. What happens when you have that deer in full focus? You can shoot and hit your target. The same thing for the photographer. They can get that picture and take that picture, and they can get that picture that they want, because all of the things that were distracting them, all the things that took it out of focus, all the things that made it blurry are out of the way. And this is what happened with Hannah. When that enemy came in and tried to distract her and try to say, hey, look over here, look over here, she said, this is helping me to focus a little bit better. This is helping me to see things a little bit clearer. This is helping me to be more fierce about what I want. And so she fiercely and desperately, with driven and determination, she took her heart and she put her heart on the horns of the altar, so to speak, and she prayed a prayer the Lord would not pass by. She basically, you know what she did? She took her heart back. The enemy was playing with her heart. The enemy was trying to torment her. The enemy was trying to torture her and try to bring her down. But she took her heart back. And what did she do? She put it in the hands of God. Not in her own hands. She didn't try to guard it herself. She didn't try to protect it herself. But she put it where it could be safe. She put it where it could be protected. She put it where it could be kept. And she put it back in the hands of God. When our heart and our mind and our everything is in the hands of God, what can the enemy say about it? What can the enemy do about it? The enemy can't cross the bloodline. He can scream and he can shout all he wants on the other side of the bloodline, and he will and he does. But he can't cross the bloodline, thank the Lord. And then in verses 10 through 11, it says, and she was in bitterness of soul, and prayed unto the Lord, and wept sore. And she vowed a vow and said, O Lord of hosts, if thou wilt indeed look on the affliction of thine handmaid, and remember me, and not forget thine handmaid, but will give unto thine handmaid a man-child, then I will give him unto the Lord all the days of his life, and there shall no razor come upon his head. It was as if Hannah went home and did her homework, because she didn't pray a prayer that was passive with no real thought or passion. She wasn't looking for a Band-Aid. She wasn't looking for a Tylenol. She was looking for the answer. She was looking for the cure-all. She was looking for the real deal. She was saying, don't just give me a Band-Aid. I didn't just skin my knee here, but my heart is broken. I need something that's going to heal my broken heart. My heart is in anguish. I am weeping sore. I am in bitterness of soul. I need something that can touch my soul. You see, a Band-Aid can't touch your soul. A Tylenol can't touch your soul. But the hand of God can reach right in and cure that broken heart and soul. So she prayed like a warrior. She prayed with a very detailed, well thought out, fully intentional prayer. She got in that prayer closet and she prayed like a prayer warrior. You want to know what a prayer warrior looks like? Read this story. This is the example of a prayer warrior that says, you know what? Outside this prayer room, the enemy has been beating me up. Outside of this house of God, the enemy has been beating me up.
Outside of this place, the enemy has been slapping me around with a bunch of lies and trying to torment me and trying to remind me of what I don't have. But I'm going to God. Like that song, Take Me to the King. Take me to the King. My heart is torn in pieces. It's been suffering. Take me to the King. And that's what Hannah did. She got in there and she said, take me to the King. Husband, I got to see the King. Adversary, I got to go see the King. Priest, Eli, I got to go see the King. I need you all to get out of my way because I need to go see the King. I need to go see a man that can. I need to go see a God that hears. I need to go see a God that can answer my prayer like none other can. I need to go see the King. This was an intentional prayer. It was as if her back was to the wall and Satan's hounds were barking all in her face. What are you going to do when you have nowhere else to run? You've ran and you've ran and you've ran. You've been like the woman that had the issue of blood. She spent all her money on everything around her, on every little Google answer she could find, on every little doctor that was on the corner and here and there and everywhere. She spent all her money trying to find an answer. Now what are you going to do? Your back is to the wall. You've run out of resources. You've done all that you know to do. You have no more friends. You have nothing else around you that can answer or solve your problems. Now what are you going to do? What did Hannah do? She said, take me to the King. It was as if the only way to end the sore, bitter, provoking that she had been going through was by drawing a line in the sand and determining within herself that enough was enough. It was time to go to the King and to get what she wanted. It was time for war. There comes a time when we, as children of God, we have to draw the line in the sand. And we have to say, I've had enough of this. Sometimes we're entirely too passive. Sometimes we're entirely too kind. But there comes a time when you can draw the line in the sand and you can go to war in spirit. You see, we walk by faith and not by sight. We don't walk in the flesh, we walk in the spirit. So how are you going to fight this thing? How are you going to deal with this thing? In prayer. Listen, I have heard my mama pray some prayers. I have heard her pray one time. I heard her pray and say, Sister Anna, she said, and Lord, make the devil leave with his tail tucked between his legs. I took a mental note of that. And that sounds like a prayer of war to me. That sounds like a prayer of fighting. That sounds a prayer like, I'm drawing the line in the sand. Enough of this. I see who's behind this. I know who's doing this. I know who's trying to call the shots here. I know who's trying to make me feel weary. I know who's trying to make me feel stressed out. I know who's trying to torment my mind. Enough of this. Stop it. You don't own me. You didn't redeem me. You didn't buy me back. I got a new life in Jesus Christ. He owns me. He is my King. He is my Father. He is my friend that sticks closer than any brother. Enough of this. I'm drawing the line in the sand. Enough of this. And that's what Hannah did. And so as Hannah continued to earnestly multiplying her prayer, when the priest Eli saw her silently praying, he marked her mouth. Or we could say he observed, he studied, and seemingly suspiciously watched her mouth. He did so as he thought she was drunk. However, what he couldn't see, hear, or even begin to discern was that her heart was having a passionate conversation with her Lord. Now, Eli's reaction to Hannah's unusual and agonizing prayer was off. However, I too have been known to react suspiciously and not spiritually when I have seen someone doing something different. I think we probably, if we were really honest, could all agree with that. That we kind of did the slant eye, one eyebrow up. What is that about? been suspicious when we saw somebody worship a little bit different than what we think is customary. Well, I guarantee you, if you went, and I've never been there, but brother, I know that y'all have been there to foreign lands like Jamaica, I think, and the Dominican and such. They don't worship like we worship. It's entirely different. I've heard Brother Harold Hanks say that, when he's in Jamaica, he's going to do as the Jamaicans do. And he was going to worship like they worship. And so when somebody comes in and they don't worship exactly like we worship, what happens? All of a sudden it's stiff. Everybody gets like this. Oh no, what am I supposed to do? How am I supposed to react to this? How can I be really, really spiritual in this moment? But not everybody is going to worship the same. When I worship, you can generally hear me. That's just how I worship, and I'm happy with that. I'm not going to change that. I'm not going to turn it down. I'm happy with this is who God made me. Sister Annie, when you worship, you dance a little bit. That's how you worship. Sister Sue, when she worships, everybody knows. I wished I could worship like that. I'd be in shape. I'd never have to exercise. And I love that. Everybody worships differently. And it's okay, as long as it's real, true worship. Now, Hannah, however, pleaded as she confessed in verses 15 through 16 that she was a woman of a sorrowful spirit, that she had poured out her soul before the Lord, even out of her abundance of her complaint and grief, and had spoke to the Lord. Now let's remember, Hannah had been provoked sore and made to fret by her adversary, but Hannah did not allow her emotions to stay bottled up inside of her. Instead, she took those emotions where they could be heard, dealt with, and used. She took what she couldn't control and couldn't change, and she took it to the one who can and will. See, the Lord has a way of using our affliction for his glory. And Hannah allowed her affliction to compel her to seek the Lord and pray through. Now, the Bible does tell us that our afflictions work a far more exceeding eternal glory, that the afflicted should pray, that many are the afflictions of the righteous, but God delivers them out of them all, that the Lord makes our afflictions his business. The Bible also tells us that affliction has a way of purifying believers. It does so by refining, chastening, and breaking us open to freedom, answers, and results, just as it did for Hannah, causing her to pour out her soul to the Lord. See, her heart was so full of affliction, grief, and bitter sorrow that when she opened her mouth, it quickly and powerfully poured out like a waterfall rushing free. You couldn't stop it. Once it happened, it came forth, and it was unstoppable. Our afflictions are not in vain. They are working a far more exceeding and eternal glory. Remember what I said earlier. Those afflictions, they have a way of putting things in focus. Like I said with that camera, when I take that lens and turn it a little bit, it brings things into focus, and I can take the picture. Afflictions can have a way of cleansing us, of purifying us, of refining us, and putting things in focus. Hannah's desperate plea, it moved Eli to tell her in verse 17, "Go in peace, and the God of Israel grant thee thy petition that thou hast asked of him." So there was more to Hannah's need. Let me start over. So there was no more for Hannah to fret. There was no more need for Hannah to fret. The Lord had heard and answered her prayer. She didn't need to weary God with that. She didn't need to say, well, what are you going to do exactly? What do you mean go in peace? What do you mean? What do I need to do? Is there something I need to do? That sounds entirely too simple. That sounds entirely too easy. What do you mean? Just believe. What do you mean go in peace? That sounds just way too easy. She could leave her place of prayer in peace, knowing the God that changes everything was going to somehow, some way change everything. Now, here's where Hannah's faith equips her to truly go in peace, just as Eli said. See, with every step towards the door and towards home, Hannah's faith grows a little stronger. He said, go in peace. Okay, my faith just got a little bit stronger. That's going. It just got a little bit stronger and a little bit. You see, every step, that faith got a little bit stronger. Now, if she was stepping backwards, not so much. But she left and she went in peace. And it was evident in her countenance. Verse 18 says, her countenance was no more sad. We could say she left church that day with a smile on her face. The thing that once afflicted her was no longer in her adversary's hands. No longer did that adversary have that control over her. She left in peace. She picked her peace up like it was a pocketbook. And she left with that peace. She picked it up like it was a backpack. And she left in peace. She left with a smile on her face. The thing that once afflicted her was no longer in her adversary's hands, but it was left at the altar. She cast all her care on the Lord, and the Lord that cares, what did he do? He received her afflicted plea. Now, she didn't leave the temple with a baby in her arms. And that's what she was asking for. She didn't leave the temple that day with a baby in her arms, but she left with what she needed. What did she need? She needed peace. God met her immediate need first. You see, that's what he does. He meets your immediate need. Right now, you need peace so you can believe. You need peace so that you can go. You need peace so that your faith will grow stronger. You need peace to have the joy of the Lord. You need peace to overcome your adversary. Her immediate need was peace, and it was a peace that only God could give to her to overcome. This was something her husband couldn't give her. It was something Eli, the priest, could not give her. The peace she needed could only come from God, and she needed that peace so she could go in peace and be able to take those steps of faith back home with the same adversary that had provoked her to her breaking point. That same adversary, I can't get her name, I think it's Peninnah or something like that, but the other wife, they were all going back home together. She was going back home with that adversary. You know, when I think about that, I think about what Jesus said about us being in the world, but we're not of the world, and how he has sent us forth as sheep among wolves. You see, we're in this world, but we're not of it. And we are sheep among wolves. So we should behave ourselves wisely. Sometimes God changes us before he changes the situation. And that's exactly what he did in Hannah. He changed her before he changed her outcome. He changed her before he changed her situation. Then in verse 20, Hannah conceived her heart's desire and called his name Samuel because she asked him of the Lord. So Hannah gave the Lord honor in naming her son Samuel, meaning heard of God, because she knew God heard her cry and granted her petition. Samuel's name was Hannah's testimony. Her son's name was her testimony of what God did for her, for everyone that would come to know her child's name. Think about that. His name was her testimony, meaning heard of God. Who was heard of God? Hannah was heard of God, and that's all she needed. Knowing in her heart that she was heard of God. When you know that God has heard your prayers, it does something for you nothing in this world can ever do. And sometimes he will do that in a way that your mind can't explain it. You try to tell somebody why you got peace, or why you feel joy, or why you just don't need to feel like you need to worry about it anymore. And sometimes you feel like you're explaining the invisible man. I have been there. where I try to explain to unbelievers and to others, why I feel the way I feel. And sometimes I feel like and basically, I guess you're explaining the invisible man that's in the room right now, and they look at you like you have two heads. What are you talking about? What do you mean? But everybody that would say the name Samuel was saying Hannah's testimony, heard of God. And for Hannah, that was enough. Samuel's name was Hannah's testimony of what God did for her and everyone that would come to know that name. Now, do you need to overcome? How do you overcome? By the word of your testimony. Do you need to overcome? Is the enemy trying to beat you down sore with something? You can testify by no other name but the name of Jesus. That's the greatest testimony you could ever testify to this entire world. And in verses 27 through 28 of our lesson, we read Hannah's conversation with Eli as she reminded him of who she was. She's come back to the temple. It's been many years or several years, and she's come back to the temple with her son. She reminded him that she was the woman who stood by him praying unto the Lord as she told him her heart's prayer for the child she had with her there, for it had come time for her to keep her vow. She came back to that temple with the child that she was praying for, and now it was time for her to keep her vow. And keeping her vow, Hannah's courageous actions confirmed her trustworthiness. She was a trustworthy vessel of the Lord. And there is something to be said about a trustworthy vessel. Trust is easy to lose and hard to gain. Once somebody breaks that trust, it's very, very, very challenging to regain that trust. But Hannah was a trustworthy vessel. God could count on her to keep her vow. God could count on her to follow through. God could count on her to do what she had promised to do. And by reminding Eli of who she was, Eli could see that she was not the same sorrowful woman. She was a new woman with joy and purpose. She's a brand new woman. She's not the same. Remember that old person that came in here real sorrowful and depressed and sad, unhappy and grieving, broken? And you remember that? Well, that's me. That's me. Yeah, I know. I don't look the same because I'm smiling today. And look, here's this child that I prayed for. Here's the promise that God said that he would keep, that he would grant, that he would grant. And look, God kept his promise. And now, here it is. I'm going to keep my promise. She had a purpose. And in 1 Samuel chapter 2, verses 1 through 10, Hannah praised and exalted the Lord for all he was to her. Now, for just a moment, I want us to go back to verse 28 in our lesson where it says, and he worshiped the Lord there. Now, when I studied this out, the commentaries that I used to study this out, they contradicted each other, I should say. Some said it was her husband, Elkanah, and some said it was Samuel. And I believe it was Samuel because the he that she's talking about over and over and over and over in this verse is Samuel. And so I believe with all my heart that it was Samuel. When I read this verse, I don't read of any other he that she's talking about. And he worshiped the Lord. But that's what happens when men want to make sense of things. You see, they want to say, well, there's no way a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old, 4-year-old could worship the Lord. Yes, they can. Don't deny them. Suffer the little children, for such is the kingdom of heaven. They can worship the Lord, and they can do it far better than we can sometimes. And see, so that son, at a very young age, he was also a worshiper of the Lord. Hannah's relationship with the Lord was so real, so powerful and undeniable that even her young son worshiped the Lord. See, our commitment to the Lord matters. Hannah needed purpose, and she did not want to be spoiled. Her relationship with God mattered. Think about that. It mattered so much that it affected her son to become a worshiper. Now, we know that Hannah, she needed purpose, but she didn't want to be spoiled. Her husband gave her extra. He gave her an extra portion, but she needed and wanted purpose. And she had a child for the Lord's use and a great purpose. Let's understand, people need purpose. A purpose gives people a deep sense of reason to exist. And Hannah needed purpose. She wanted a son. She wanted a child. God met her need first. She needed peace. She needed peace in order to walk by faith and then to be able to have that child and have that purpose. She needed purpose. And Samuel gave her purpose. God gave her purpose. And that Samuel, that child, would be dedicated to the Lord all the days of his life and would serve can you imagine? She would tell her neighbors and her friends, "Oh, my son Samuel, do you know him? He lives in the temple. He's a prophet of God. He's used of the Lord. He's greatly used of God. Do you know my son that's greatly used of the Lord?" And what a joy it gave her to have a son that was used of God and knew how to be a worshiper of God. She now had this great, phenomenal purpose in her life. I'm going to take us to our golden text because I've ran out of time. In our golden text, it says, 1 Samuel 1:20, "Wherefore it came to pass, when the time was come about, after Hannah had conceived, that she bare a son, and called his name Samuel, saying, Because I have asked him of the Lord. She named her son her testimony, as an honor unto the Lord her God. Her testimony was heard of God." That was her testimony. So his name was a type of memorial for all who would come to know it and say it. Imagine every time someone said the name Samuel, ultimately they were saying, heard of God, heard of God, heard of God. I love that. Hannah was saying to the world, my God answers prayers. That's what she was saying by naming him that. See, the world needs to know that we serve a God that answers prayers. They need to know the God we serve is alive and well, that he is current, he is present, and he is able, and he is always in control. The world needs Jesus, but how will they know they can find Jesus if they don't see the King Jesus we proclaim to live by, living and breathing and acting out through each and every one of us? When push comes to shove and the rubber meets the road, the world's hope is lost. Does the world know you serve a God who owns it all? Do they know that? Recently, a few weeks ago, my daughter called me, and her first words as soon as I picked up the phone, "You need to pray right now." Two of her dogs had ran off. And she was all up in arms, panicked, freaking out. She was very serious. She wasn't kidding. "You need to pray right now." And as silly as that might seem, who did she call? And why? She knows. The world knows if you can pray through or not. When this world has lost all hope, who do they call, Sister Dana? Who does Jonathan call? Who do they call? Who do they call, Brother Joe? When they need hope and they need answers. That's right. They know. They know. So with that, I'm going to conclude our lesson. Brother Joe, if you'll close us out in prayer, please.